And when you go through that process and you're committed to it, you're super into it, right? Like a priest isn't going to all of a sudden be like, oh, you know what, everything I'm doing's pretty DS, and I don't really know anything about this whole God situation, so I'm just gonna dip out. And it's like, well, what are you gonna do? How are you gonna make money? You're a priest. Like you have one specific thing that skill set there. Like what do you're just gonna be a priest but not believe in God? You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, once you go through that lens of interpretation, you're just kind of committed to it.
True. I, I I guess I'm like, I know that within myself that I can challenge my beliefs, and I don't cling on to anything. But yeah, if you go to school, you pay all this money, you get taught this.
Hold
I
on a
go
second.
to
Hold on a second. Right here, we have an actual PhD in the chat gaslighting people. John, the only way they'd have to tilt the telescope is if there were an ether. John, does light slow down in water? Yes or no? And are you there, sir?
He said light slows down on water.
Oh, am I? Oh, I didn't realize I could talk. Sorry. Okay. Hold on a sec. Let me, there. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's the Flurfs always misinterpret the Airy failure thing.
Stop with the ad-homs. Yes or no question.
Was that an ad-hom?
Yes. Like, I don't care about what you misinterpret, Flurf, dog shit. I just asked you a direct question, yes or no.
Yes, I said yes. I said yes.
So light slows down in the water.
Right.
If the Earth is moving out from underneath the Earth, because of that timing difference.
Well, there is no. See, that's the thing in relativity.
Do not interrupt me in the middle of my sentence, dude.
Okay.
That is not going to happen here. All right. So when the light slows down in the water, there's a timing difference. There's going to be a greater distance that the Earth can travel before the light hits the observer. That's going to increase the angle. This is how refraction works. We already noted that. We know there's a timing difference, and we know that if the Earth is physically moving, that's going to produce an angle change. This has nothing to do with an ether. The ratio for aberration is the velocity of Earth, the assumed velocity, and the speed of light. There's no ether variable in there.
My turn? Yeah. So see, the thing that you keep putting in there is the Earth's moving. There's no such thing as absolute velocity. When you talk about the Earth moving, you're implicitly assuming that it's moving through an ether, in which case the light would bend because of the slowing down. But the Earth isn't moving through anything. There's an Earth and there's a star. And the distance between them may be getting less, maybe getting larger, maybe getting smaller. It doesn't make any difference. The light comes directly to the Earth from the star. And if it slows down on the way, it slows down. It doesn't angle off because there is no angular motion. There's just an Earth and a light source, and the light comes directly to the detector. This is explained in lots of videos. You can look them up online. You probably take issue with them, but it's that simple.
Okay, so your argument is that stellar aberration isn't a mutually exclusive proof of Earth's motion. It doesn't matter if motion is absolute or not. Dynamically, if you're moving out from something that's moving slower, you're not going to land in the center of it. So it doesn't. That doesn't matter if motion is absolute or not. This doesn't have anything to do with moving through an ether or an absolute reference frame. That's actually the purpose of this experiment, and that's why it's so important. Because irrespective of any ether mechanics, this is a physical effect that is dictated by Snell's law and the and cosines, like just the angles, right, and the ratio over the velocity for the aberration. So there's no ether mechanic involved here. And what you said about angular motion is irrelevant. This applies to linear motion. Angular doesn't matter.
Well, you said a lot of stuff there, but it's just not true. It's very simple. The only time in which you would actually
What did I
concern
say?
yourself, well, the only time you would concern yourself with an Earth moving transverse to the source of the light is if the Earth was moving through something that could make that kind of a velocity meaningful. And that's what the experiment was intended to do, was to detect the motion of the ether by seeing how much the light deflected when you had the water there, because that would mean that the Earth is moving transverse to the source. Because they didn't see that, it was one more piece of evidence, either, depending what you like, that the Earth isn't moving relative to the ether, or that there isn't any ether. But just like the Michelson-Morley experiment, the Airy failure, as it's called, was a failure to detect the Earth's motion through the ether. It's that simple.
Okay, John, we're going to read a little bit from Klinker-Fuse's hypothesis, which was the inspiration for Airy to follow up on the significance of the alleged results from Klinker-Fuse, and we'll see exactly what the purpose of the experiment was here. It's from Klinker-Fuse. 1 second, I'm going to get some water.
I don't know what that is. Klinker-Fuse, is that what you said?
Yes, this was a German physicist and astronomer in the 1800s who did the first iteration of Airy's failure, and he said that he actually measured the aberration angle when he introduced the medium. The significance here is the derivation for the ratios for everything and the purpose of it. Because you made a lot of claims there. So we're going to get into the exact specifics of why the experiments were done and why this was a failure for Earth's orbital velocity and had nothing to do with the ether, because you keep specifically saying that this is an ether velocity issue. First, they were testing for a velocity through an ether. Now you're saying they were testing for a dynamic ether. So you're all over the place in this, but we're going to get real specific and look at the actual paper here. So this is Professor Klinker-Fuse, German physicist in the 1800s, who was prior to the Airy's aberration experiment. So the aberration of the fixed stars. Under the term aberration, two different processes are almost always combined in the writings dealing with this subject. First, the delusion, which are subject by the direction of the ray owing to the motion of our point of view, and which are quite comparable, is that which we fall in a fast-moving carriage or a railroad over the direction of pouring rain. Secondly, the real change in the direction of the ray, which is also caused by the movement of the Earth. The former may be called a psychological effect, and the latter the physical part of aberration, meaning the actual angle change due to the distance that the Earth moves out from underneath the light that is incoming. Right? Now, however you want to interpret that, doesn't matter. As long as there's a timing difference, there's going to be a distance change, which is going to create an angle change. Confounding these two, the different effects under the concepts of aberration, by aberration being understood to mean the total and apparent real change at the direction of the ray caused by Earth's motion, has nothing less than a favorable treatment of the object. Even the consideration, the expediency of the sharp limitation of the concepts, and every terminology would suffice to find the combination of the two processes, which are related by a common origin, but incidentally different, not advantageous, but also adds to the two parts of aberration, are a different difficulty of treatment. And it goes on to say here, now this is important, pay attention. Remark essentially pronounced by Fresnel's words, in other words, gives us the opportunity, a very important theory of aberration, in which the physical aberration is altered when the deflection by reflection or refraction, or what appears to be the quite small influence of Earth's motion by refraction or reflection. By this, we may be, since we obtain by way of experience independently any hypothesis about the translatory motion of the flow or the ether, we have the same time gained in the experience of the latter. Oh, no way. So independent of any ether effects, there's still going to be a difference. Okay. But also what Fresnel proposed, right? Like, we're not going to discount that yet, but independent of this, there's still going to be a difference. On the basis of the proposal, or the proposition, according to which refraction and reflection are explained in the wave theory, it follows that the influence of Earth's motion on reflection and refraction, just as it should when the ether, both the medium and the both a medium and the world of space would be quite free of transitory motion, or rather free, as merely the partition of the refracting or reflecting medium were moved, without being accompanied by the transitory movement of the ether. We conclude that either the ether is really at rest, or that its transitory motion has no effect whatsoever on the appearance. In this dilemma, we find the former assumption reprehensible for various reasons, so we decided according to experience for the second, but we are also able to prove the latter, that is independent of the physical aberration hypothesis about the transitory motion of ether, in harmony with the fundamental doctrines of wave theory, but we will not refrain from doing so to note that this independently extends only to the phenomenon which, like the present one, only has to do with the position of the plane waves and their normals. The diffraction phenomenon, for the example, which other conditions are still decisive, one cannot assert the independence of the phenomenon from the transitory motion of the ether. It is a known fact, or it is known that Fazal's acumen in diffraction phenomenon has recognized a mean of measuring the transitory motion of the ether itself in a hypothesis which Fresnel, which I will cite later. I have the citation for, but I think that's sufficient. So what he's saying here is that independent of any ether effects, the cool thing about this experiment is that there's going to be a timing difference when we introduce a medium, and that's going to tell us definitively which is in motion. So no more about, oh, this is about a failed ether experiment. They failed to find the ether. Michelson-Morley failed to find the ether. You're going to have to substantiate that. Where in these documents do they say we failed to find ether? Where in Michelson-Morley, 1887, it's not that big of a paper, where does it say we failed to find any ether? You substantiate that. If you cannot substantiate that, then you don't have anything to contribute to the conversation, and you're going to have to move on to a new point and address the fact that if the Earth is actually in motion and the cause of aberration in air is that motion, when you introduce a medium, guess what? There's still going to be an angle change because now there's a timing difference. So irrespective of any mediums or absolute motion, this is your proof that the Earth is in motion. Now you're saying it's not proof, and that this is somehow ether dependent. Go ahead and respond.
Wow, thank you. So I'm not going to blather on for long here. I'm just going to say once again, I don't know how many people found that compelling. I know I had a hard time following it. I'm not even sure what in the end he's saying. Maybe everybody here is smarter than I am. But I think that was not a compelling reading. I'll just say one more time. Several times in there, you talked about the motion of the Earth. What do you, when you talk about the motion of the Earth, what are you talking about?
Motion of the Earth relative to the stars. The velocity, the aberration angle prediction is the tangent. Angle is the velocity of Earth over the speed of light, which gives a theta of 20.5 something arc seconds.
What's the theta? How do you
stop? Theta is the angle that's measured for aberration, and when you ratio that against the speed of light, you get 30 kilometers a second. You can look at a little diagram here to show you. So when you say, "What are we talking about?" It's aberration, dog. Do you not know what aberration is?
Yeah.
The arctan E over C gives you the theta, which is 20 arc seconds, which is what they say stellar aberration is. So they're drawing the correlation that this is evidence for Earth's motion. Here we have, in 1889, Wilhelm Well saying, hey, these experiments, the experiments that give positive results for Earth's motion, the aberration of light of fixed stars. And then he goes on to say the experiments that give negative results are the attempts to see whether the influence is of refraction of the light of the fixed stars. So
am
that's
I
exactly
the
what
only
we're
one hearing
talking
an echo?
about.
Sorry,
Yeah.
bro. Am I the only one hearing an echo here?
I think
else
if you
was
have
asking
both,
about
if you
an
have the
echo
other
earlier.
screen share, I had that too when I was looking at the other stream. You have to just look at the second stream up at the top, I think.
Okay.
That's what I had.
No worries. But yeah, these experiments were about determining the aberration, if the cause of it was Earth's velocity.
Well,
If
so
you're,
once
if you're taking
again,
the position,
oh, Jesus.
if you- go ahead. Just if you can, if possible, make an actual argument against what I'm putting forward instead of saying, I don't find it compelling. I found it confusing. What was confusing? What do you need clarification on? How can I help you understand my position better so that you can formulate an articulable argument against it that isn't an appeal to, feigning ignorance? You have a PhD in this, so this is pretty straightforward. You
Tell
should
me
be
when
able
you're
to
done.
understand refraction. Done. Go ahead.
Jesus. Okay. So once again, forget about the Earth. Just point a telescope at a star. The light that you have to point the telescope at the star. The light is coming from the star. It comes down the telescope. If it comes at a slower rate, it'll come at a slower rate. That's it. Because the only way it would make a difference is if the telescope is slicing transversely through an ether. And so if we saw some kind of deflection of the light, that would be evidence for an ether. Since we didn't see deflection, it's evidence either that there is no ether or the Earth is at rest with respect to the ether. It's that simple.
Say, forget about the Earth. You're saying forget about the velocity of the Earth in this equation.
Earth
which is
doesn't
literally
have a velocity.
Stop. A velocity component to substantiate heliocentrism in the Copernican in Kepler's laws in Newtonian dynamics is 30 kilometers a second. So when
No.
you say the Earth, stop. Okay, so Kepler's laws don't apply. The Earth isn't moving around the sun.
There is no such thing as absolute velocity. That's one of the lessons of the Airy failure, the Michelson-Morley experiment.
No.
A velocity is only meaningful relative to something else.
Relative to the sun is the Earth moving around it at 30 kilometers a second.
That's the way we like to describe it, but there's no way to know. You guys know yourself.
Stop. Stop.
What do you mean? You asked me a question, and I'm answering.
I know it's more like a yes or no, very simple question. It doesn't require obfuscation and dog shit. Okay, that's what we like to think about it. No. You guys have very specific cosmological claims and velocities. Whether or not you want to, however you want to think about it, this is a dynamic falsification of the dynamics that are applied to the sky, where it's been told to us that Kepler's laws can be derived from Newton's and vice versa. Therefore, the gravitational potential between the sun and the Earth produces a velocity of 30 kilometers a second, which gives us the periodicity of the sun that we see, and the Earth is, and that's the Earth moving around the sun, right? This is what all of cosmology is built on. And then on top of that, they have measurements of stars that they say are deviating from their true position at a ratio that corresponds to 30 kilometers a second. So your argument now is that you don't believe that the Earth is in motion and that it's actually at rest.
Yeah, let him answer now.
The relative velocity changes.
Because
the relative
you
velocity.
add water to telescope, the velocity in the aberration equation changes. This means that the theta angle will also change. And what they didn't find was that there was a change to that magnitude. It stayed the same. Okay? So when you say no absolute velocity, blah, 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 it's fine. Fine. But relative to the sun, our incoming velocity has been falsified now.
Okay, my turn. So when the Earth is moving in some direction relative to the sun, stars will appear to be in a different position relative to when the Earth is moving at some other direction. But that doesn't mean that the Earth is moving relative to the star. All you have is the Earth and the star, and they may be getting closer together. They may be getting further apart, but there's no tangential motion that would cause any deflection of the light. Tangential motion, when you start talking about the motion of the Earth as if it's moving tangentially, you are implying an ether that it's moving relative to, or something that the light cares about. The light only knows that it's coming from the star to the detector in a straight line, and if it slows down on the way, it slows down on the way. There's nothing to deflect that light if there's no ether. And that was the whole point. Anybody can read about this in many different ways. You can watch videos on the Airy failure. The Airy failure was a failure to detect the ether.
Okay. So, dude, what you just listed at the beginning there, right? The position of the star changing, the aberration, that's optical. That's kinematics. That's a measurement. It can't tell you if the Earth is moving or if the sky is moving. That's why they introduced the water. I just read to you and went over it showed you the math. Nothing about this has to do with ether. That's not a variable in the component. If the light slows down in water and the Earth is physically in motion, regardless of what you want to make that motion relative to, it has to be in a physically different spot to correspond to Kepler's laws and Newton's laws and all these things. So if that's true, if it's physically true, then the angle has to increase. It has nothing to do with an ether. You need to show me where in these papers there's an argument about this being an ether argument. Okay? There's none of that. You've mentioned it several times and reiterated it. Just show me in Airy's paper where he says this falsifies an ether. There's no motion relative to an ether or anything like that. Because I just went over the clinker fuse stuff. And you complained that it was it went on for too long or whatever. It was hard to follow, but it was pretty straightforward. I'm sure anyone here could steel man what was read. So you don't have to be obtuse about it. And when you say you can watch videos of blah, 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 like, bro, I'm looking at the source material, dog. There's no higher form of source of authority than the actual source material. I need a video for, dog.
Well, I'm not going to appeal to authority. I'm just telling you in simple terms why the Airy's failure was a failure to detect transverse motion of the Earth through an ether. That should be pretty simple to understand. If the Earth is moving transversely through an ether, then it's going to matter if the light slows down and gets dragged by that ether for a longer time. That's not what's observed. And so it is a failure to detect the ether. And there's lots of places you can read about that in much clearer form than Professor Klinghoffer or whatever that was.
Where are the places?
Just Google Airy's failure and pick whatever you like. Just to use a little bit of discretion. In finding something that's good. I don't have one at the tip of my fingers.
I'm on Google. I'm on Google.com. Tell me what to type.
Airy's failure.
Airy's failure. Okay. We got Flat Earth WS. We got TS or TFSE.org. What do you want? What do you want me to click?
Well, those will give you the straight poop, but I know you will dismiss them because they're talking to flat earthers. Even though you find that. So
this, I got you. So this, okay, which has.
There's plenty of things. Quora, there are things. Quora gives good stuff.
Hold on.
Why is it that you get to interrupt me? But I guess because you're a moderator or something. Maybe that's fair. Okay.
Yes, that's exactly why.
Okay, then I'll shut up.
So, thank you. I'm glad you know your place now. So listen, looking at the Flat Earth W thing, right? This is what it says. Airy's failure was an experiment which Sir Airy failed to confirm the ether theory by measuring stellar aberration, which proved that Earth's orbital motion. Okay. Let's keep reading. The ether hypothesis predicted that the water-filled telescope should be different should have a different value for the stellar aberration than an air-filled one. Okay. The change was not observed, hence Airy's failure, ruling out the ether. Stellar aberration in its annual shift of the position of the stars. It was first direct evidence of Earth's motion around the sun. Oh, no way. This claim, Airy's failure, is about proving Earth's motion. In reality, it was the aim to confirm an ether theory, but it failed to do so. The experiment relied on an already accepted knowledge that the ether is in an orbit around the sun. The shift of the apparent motion of the stars, light from Lambda Draconis. Very cool. Okay, and we have here a little quote from James Bradley from 1777. All right. So what's being put forward here is that this experiment was about the ether. Now, when I go to the primary source material, which I just read from you, it didn't have anything to do with an ether theory or ether velocities or ether drift or drag. And what it had to do with was introducing a timing difference so that the angle would change, which would facilitate that the Earth is moving underneath it, and it's going to cause that. So we're establishing a cause and effect relationship by adding water. So when we have parallax and stellar aberration in air, we just have a measurement that can't tell us which is moving. When we do the water, that tells us which is moving. If there's no change, then the starlight already comes in at that angle. That's the last I'm going to say on it. I'll let you get your last word. I'm not going to keep going back and forth with you, but you need to actually provide a primary source that backs up what you're talking about, because I've provided 3 so far. They all back up my position. You're appealing to a meme on a website.
Okay, so I'll just say I think most of what you said there was right. Certainly the things you read say what I said. And I agree with them. It's simple. It's, as I say, it's simple. To have a transverse velocity meaning something, it has to be transversely moving with respect to something. And it isn't. You just have a telescope aimed at a star, and the starlight is coming straight down that telescope to the detector. That's the relativistic view. That's what happens when you don't have an ether. But it's also, if you want, what would happen if the Earth wasn't moving. Now, the point is that it is the case that when the Earth is on the other side of the sun, it's moving at a different velocity relative to the star as well. So that changes the apparent position of the star. But between the two things, you still have light coming from the star directly to the detector. The Earth isn't slicing through an ether. And that's what the things you read on the web talk about. I don't know. I said already, I didn't follow the thing you read. It's not a primary source. It's not George Airy. It's somebody I've never heard of. Maybe it's somebody who was saying correct things. I don't know. I couldn't follow it. Maybe everybody else here is smarter than I am and could, but it sounded needlessly complicated, and it makes me think that it probably was somebody who didn't really know what he's talking about. Now, I could be wrong about that. Maybe it was just complicated and they need to spend more time with it. But the experiment itself is not complicated. It's what I said.
Well, I understood him pretty well. I think he was pretty on point. I don't know which part you didn't understand, but hey, that's cool. That's okay. Maybe you got to do some more research.
Yeah, I got a question for this topic, actually, whoever wants to speak on it.
One second. I got a bunch to address here.
Oh, okay.
So what we read was absolutely primary source documentation. As I explained to you at the beginning of this conversation, if you were listening and following along, you could participate in it rather than doing what you're doing now. So Airy's experiment was done after Klinkerfuse, who did the same thing and said that he measured the angle change. So I just pulled up Airy's paper here. He talks about this in the beginning, who Klinkerfuse is and why he's doing it. Then he goes on to talk about the measurements and the results. And he says, I think myself justified in concluding that the hypothesis of clinker fuse is untenable. Had it been retained, the aberration employed in the corrections would have increased by 15 arc seconds and decreased by 15 arc seconds in the latter part of the year, just like you were saying, where in relative times of the year and with the Earth's position around the sun, you would have, you'll be going towards and away from, so you're going to have to change the angle. And this position is untenable. What was clinker fuse's hypothesis, right? That's where I went back to the primary source material, which you could find right here on McToon's website, mctoon.net/relativity. You could pull up clinker fuse's translated documents where he goes over everything that I just laid out. So here's Toon's website. You can go here. I'll send you the link. You can get up to date on your primary sources. So here we go. Copy URL. So here it is in the chat. Now, this is absolutely primary source information. And as we just read, it had nothing to do with an ether in regards to the ether being the dynamic cause or the motion being relative to the ether. This is independent of that, because the medium of water is going to introduce a timing difference. So if the Earth is physically in motion, there's going to be a change. You cannot escape that. That is a physical fact. You can't make it relative to this or that or do a transformation. And actually, you mentioned too that something about relativity when you correctly apply it or whatever. No, it doesn't predict no angle change. Relativity does predict an angle change, and I'll pull that up now. We'll look at the relativistic prediction for the angle change. And you're going to be surprised to note that it matches the classical prediction. So we have the classical prediction, which predicts that when you introduce water, the angle will be 27 arc seconds. Have the relativistic derivation here, which is identical to the classical derivation, except this has a little gamma factor in here. And I'm not going to go through the extended version because I already did earlier, but you know what the gamma factor is. This is a change in the coordinates x and the distance and time as a function of velocity squared over c squared. So this is an extremely small term. The first order term is the classical equation. This term is secondary, and it's actually going to be neglected here because when you math these out, what you get is a difference of 2/10,000,000ths of an arc second. So they're completely identical because the gamma factor term is actually neglected. So relativity theory does predict an angle change, right? And then from that, because the angle change is predicted but not measured, what you have to do is then invoke a transformation where you assume the velocity of the Earth, even though you don't believe in velocities of the Earth relative to the thing, but you'll assume it for a math equation for a transformation. And I'm not saying you because you didn't even argue this, but this is the mainstream narrative that's put forward for the explanation. Now, anyway, you take that velocity of the Earth and you transpose it into the incoming light and you say, ta-da, now the light has a horizontal velocity component and it's going to predict no angle change. So relativity now simultaneously, when using relativistic velocity composition, adding that little gamma factor to the classical equation makes the prediction for the angle change. And then you have to transform out of it by assuming the unmeasured velocity change in the angle. What the that's whatever, dude.
You're conflating aberration with the dragging effect that was expected in the Airy's experiment. The aberration is the change in the direction, the apparent direction to the star from one time of the year to 6 months later. That's the aberration angle. In both cases, however, whatever the telescope is relative to the star, it points at the star and the light comes straight to the detector. There's no dragging for that light to be dragged with. If you put water in there, it just slows it down. I've said this many times. I'm done. I mean, if you don't follow, or if you prefer to follow what Alan's saying, that's fine. But this is a simple thing, and you can read about it on Wikipedia. You can read about it in a lot of places. I think the Toon thing, I'm sure, I haven't ever looked at that, but I'm sure you'll find the same results there. It sounds like, from what I've read on the Toon already, it sounds like Airy was basically saying that he disagreed with clinker fuse. So I don't know. I'll have to look at that more. I'd never heard of clinker fuse before. I was spelling it wrong at
Well,
first.
you
I'll
also
take a
haven't
look.
read the Airy's paper though, because it's in direct response.
No, I haven't read the Airy's failure. I haven't read the Airy's paper because the experiment is explained in much simpler terms in lots of other places, and it's exactly. I mean, I assume Airy didn't disagree that he didn't detect a change in angle. And that failure to detect a change in angle was a failure to detect the ether that Airy was trying to find.
Yeah, no, it's a straw man. Maybe read Airy's failure before making claims about what it's about. That'd be probably a good idea, right?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
I
and hold on a
probably
sec.
would,
Hold-
but if you
hold-
can,
hold-
if
hold
you
on.
can tell me
Hold-
that,
hold, silence.
for fuck's
Silence.
sake, just ask me to
Listen.
stop. I'm in the
Yeah,
middle of talking.
listen,
you don't have to
buddy.
pretend that I interrupted you.
buddy. I'm saying stop. That's me asking you to stop.
Well, just say stop. Don't pretend that I was being a dick.
Shh. I was interrupting both of you. Be fair.
I have to be fair. This is, I mean,
It's
really,
not-
it's pretty astonishing.
Shh. Keep saying that this is due to a dragging effect, right? And I gave you primary source information and where you can find primary source information on what Clinker Fuse's hypothesis was, because the meme in Wikipedia that you are citing is strawmanning the position and the effect and the meaningfulness of it. Now, it was a zenith-mounted telescope. The telescope does not change its angle to put the star in alignment with it. So when they add the water, it's perfectly level. The water fills up the telescope entirely, so it's perfectly level as well. So it should be an angle change when they add the water. Okay? And that should increase to the tune of Earth's velocity. If the first ratio in air is caused by Earth's velocity, then also there must be a change when you add more time for the light in the telescope. That's the whole purpose of it. You saying I haven't read it and you don't know about it, but then you're simultaneously, dude, you need to get up to date on that so you can have a proper conversation and not do so much gaslighting and not following along. So, with that said, you can go ahead and get your last thought out in there. But I don't think we have anything more to discuss on the matter. I
Okay, well,
appreciate
that's
your
it.
time, and I apologize for the interruptions and the back and forth. And I know it got a little heated, but I've had some encounters with you before, and I was just trying to keep you on task and not let it go on and on. But thank you. So go ahead and get your final thought in, and thank you for participating. I appreciate it.
Once again, I'll just point out that you're conflating in the last thing. You conflated the aberration angle with the angle expected from the dragging. I mean there is an angle expected from the dragging. When you improperly assume that the 30 kilometers per second velocity is a velocity through the ether, that's where that comes from. That's different from the relativistic and classical calculations of the aberration angle, which, as you pointed out, don't change that much. That's just a conflation of two different things. Beyond that, getting back to the actual what's expected from the motion in the water-filled telescope, I've gone through that over and over, and it's just, I mean, I've told you what's happening there. You disagree. I'll let people make up their own minds.
Awesome.
We
Thank
have a
you.
question from the audience, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Is the star, if the star and the Earth share a reference frame or not? That's what he wants to know. Does the star and the Earth share a reference frame or not?
The sky is moving relative to the Earth.
I believe that was to the other guy.
Oh, okay.
Oh, my apologies.
Well, I wasn't sure myself.
No, I'm not sure myself.
I don't
either.
know what the
I
question
think
means,
so.
frankly. I don't know how to answer that. I mean, reference frames, you can have, I mean, they share lots of reference frames. You can look at them in any reference frame you want. Sharing a reference frame, I don't know what that means. Presumably, they're not moving at the same velocity. Presumably, the distance between them is changing. It would be unlikely that it weren't, and so they're not in the same rest reference frame. But I don't know if I'm answering the question, but I just don't understand it.
You don't understand what a reference frame is?
That's not what I said.
Okay, so in this situation, is the star and the Earth in the same reference frame?
Well, okay, I've already answered that question. I don't know what it means unless he's asking, are they in the same rest frame? And the answer there is unlikely. I mean, they could be, but it's pretty unlikely. You can use any reference frame you want, and they'll both be in it. But in each case, in each reference frame, they'll have some different velocity, right? One will have some velocity, one will have the other, relative to that reference frame, whichever you choose. Are they sharing it? I don't know what that means.
He
They're
means
in
the
it.
inertial. He's saying the inertial. Heracles, you can come in and ask him yourself if you like, but he means the inertial reference frame.
Well, okay, once again, yeah, pick any inertial frame you want. They're both in it. In one reference frame, one of them will be at rest. In another, the other one will be at rest. And it's unlikely that those are the same rest frames, but it's possible.
John, can you steelman Alan's position about Airy's failure? What he thinks of Airy's failure?
Well, yeah,
After
I think I have. I think that he thinks that the Earth has a transverse motion with respect to the light that should make the light, when it slows down, kind of get dragged one way or the other so that it would be at some angle. But that's really the ether argument. That was why the Airy's experiment was done, was to
Can you
detect
stop
the
repeating
effect of
that
the ether.
Airy's was
So I'm
done
not.
to detect the ether? It's just an egregious straw man. Like, the only reason you say that is because you haven't read the paper. It's really frustrating when you just keep repeating that. And if
Well,
your
that's
primary
possible.
source,
I mean,
if your
that is
primary source
possible.
for that,
Sorry.
if your primary source for that is Wikipedia and flatearth.ws, that's a garbage source. Why don't you read the paper,
The Airy's paper.
please?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. I mean, I probably should read it. It's possible that the intent of the experiment was different because people had different ideas about things at that time. It may be that I'm interpreting it in the light of everything that we know now. So I'll concede to that. It's possible that I'm misinterpreting it, but it is the case that the Airy's failure was a result of the fact that there is no ether, or that the Earth isn't moving through it.
The experiment
Yeah, but
was
John,
not
can you
about
understand their
the ether.
frustration? You just keep
repeating
repeating that
that.
talking
You keep
point,
repeating that
and
because you
they're
read it
telling
on
you to read
Wikipedia or
the paper,
flatearth.ws.
which they just quoted.
SE, you're talking over Gal. You guys are talking over each other.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear. I didn't hear. Sorry.
Like the
It's all good.
fundamental argument that this experiment was about detecting the ether, and my source is flatearth.ws or Wikipedia, and I haven't read the paper, but I know it was about this. It just sounds like a philosophical bias. It sounds like you don't actually care what it's about. You just want to say this thing over and over again. It's really frustrating. It's an
Okay,
egregious
well,
fraud
I
act.
should probably stop then. I mean, I'm giving you an accurate reading of what the Airy's failure meant to
Oh
physics,
my
but I will read the
God.
paper. I will read the paper and see what George Airy thought about it at the time.
And if you
Wow.
want an extension of that, maybe read Klinkerfuse's paper as well, which it was in response to. He specifically addresses Klinkerfuse's paper, which admittedly you hadn't heard of till this conversation, but you know so much about it and how this was all about the ether. And also, your Steelman Abound's argument was horrible. He specifically said this is not about the ether, but then you referred to it as an ether argument. It's really ignorant to come in here and just straw man someone so aggressively. And also you gaslight the shit out of everyone in here where you're like, oh, maybe you guys are much smarter than me. Maybe I can't understand it. It's just like, it's full of dog shit.
Okay, well, maybe.
Yeah,
So
Galatrax, I want to say everything you said 3 times over.